Christmas is supposed to be about family, about joy, about togetherness. For Elizabeth Ford, Christmas became the night her entire world collapsed. Her 14-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital, bleeding and terrified. Within hours, doctors delivered news that seemed impossible. The girl was pregnant. Elizabeth's mind raced through every possibility. A teacher? A therapist? Someone at church? Then came the DNA results, and everything Elizabeth thought she knew about her family shattered into 1,000 pieces. What followed was a discovery so disturbing, so unthinkable, that it made national headlines. This is the story of Elizabeth Ford, and how one night of caroling exposed a darkness no one saw coming. Elizabeth Ford was the kind of woman people admired without even trying. At 42, she'd spent most of her adult life taking care of others. She'd been a social worker before her twins were born, the type who stayed late to make sure every child on her caseload had what they needed. When Joseph and Jordan came into the world 21 years ago, she stepped away from that job to focus on raising them. Her husband Noah always said she had a gift for nurturing. The neighbors agreed. So did everyone at church. Elizabeth never questioned whether she was doing enough because everywhere she looked, people told her she was doing more than enough. Noah Ford worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. 45 years old, always presentable, always knew how to connect with people. His job required travel, 3, sometimes 4 times a month. He'd be gone for days, coming back with stories about conferences and client meetings. Elizabeth never questioned it. She trusted him completely. He was respected by everyone who knew him. People looked up to Noah. They saw a man who was devoted to his family and his faith. When he spoke at church functions, people listened. When he volunteered for committees, people were grateful to work alongside him. The twins, Joseph and Jordan, were 21 now. Identical in every way that mattered. Same height, same build, same smile that could light up a room. They were in their junior year of college, both on basketball scholarships. They still came home regularly and volunteered at special needs programs through the church. Teachers had loved them. Coaches had praised them. If you asked anyone who knew the Ford twins, you'd hear the same thing. Good kids, bright future, raised right. Elizabeth would sometimes watch old videos of them on the basketball court and feel her chest tighten with pride. These were her boys. She'd raised them to be kind, to be responsible, to care about people who couldn't always care for themselves. Elizabeth knew she was blessed. She had a husband who provided for the family. She had sons who made her proud. But there was something missing. She'd always wanted a daughter. After the twins were born, complications made it impossible for her to have more children. For years, she grieved that loss quietly. She'd see little girls at the grocery store or at church and feel that ache in her chest. Then one day, she brought up adoption to Noah. He seemed hesitant at first. Elizabeth thought that was normal. Adoption is a big decision. They talked about it for months. Eventually, Noah agreed they could start looking. They went to meet and greets. They filled out paperwork. They prayed about it. The first girl they considered was 8 years old. Bright, energetic, talked constantly. After meeting her, Noah said he didn't think it was the right fit. "She's got a lot of energy," he told Elizabeth. "I'm not sure we're ready for that." Elizabeth was disappointed, but she understood. Maybe they needed to keep looking. The second girl was 10. She had aunts and uncles who visited regularly, a grandmother who called every week. After the visit, Noah said it felt complicated. "There's a lot of family involvement," he explained. "I just worry about boundaries." Elizabeth thought he was being thoughtful, protective of their family dynamic. The third girl was 9. She attended a mainstream school. She had friends, teachers who checked in on her regularly. Noah shook his head after meeting her. "I don't know," he said. "Something just doesn't feel right." Elizabeth was heartbroken, but she didn't push. She figured when the right child came along, they'd both know. Then they met Betty. Betty was 14 years old. She had Down syndrome. She was nonverbal, communicating mostly through gestures and simple sounds. She'd been in the foster system since she was 10. Minimal family ties. No extended relatives checking in. When they met her at a church-sponsored foster event, Elizabeth felt something shift in her chest. This was the daughter she'd been praying for. Noah seemed to feel it too. "She needs us," he said. Elizabeth's heart soared. Within months, Betty became a Ford. Elizabeth spent hours decorating Betty's new room. She bought stuffed animals and colorful blankets. She made sure everything was perfect. This was the daughter she'd waited years for. The twins were 18 when Betty arrived. They seemed genuinely excited about having a little sister. They helped with everything. They'd read to her. They'd push her wheelchair when the family went out. They'd make her laugh with silly faces. Elizabeth would watch them and feel her chest tighten with pride. She'd raised good boys. Boys who understood compassion. Boys who knew how to treat someone who needed extra care and patience. The neighbors noticed too. "Those twins are something special," one woman said after seeing them help Betty at a church picnic. "You don't see young men like that anymore." Elizabeth would smile and thank them, thinking about how lucky she was, how blessed her family was. Life settled into a rhythm. Elizabeth managed the household while Noah traveled for work. The twins went off to college but came home regularly. Betty attended a special education program and had therapy appointments throughout the week. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Sunday dinners, family movie nights, annual Christmas caroling. The Fords were the kind of family people wanted to be. They were the family other families looked at and thought, "That's what we should be doing. That's what a good family looks like." Elizabeth never took it for granted. She thanked God every night for her blessings, for her home, for her children, for the life they'd built together. Then, when Betty was 16, something terrible happened. The twins said she fell. They'd been home from college for the weekend, and somehow Betty had tipped near the stairs. She tumbled down. By the time Elizabeth got there, Betty was at the bottom, not moving. The ambulance came, the hospital, the doctors. The diagnosis: severe spinal cord injury. Permanent. Betty would never walk again. Elizabeth fell apart. She blamed herself. She should have been more careful. She should have been watching. Noah held her while she cried. "Accidents happen," he said gently. "You can't be everywhere at once." The twins were devastated. They apologized over and over, their faces full of what looked like genuine guilt. Elizabeth hugged them both. "It's not your fault," she told them. "It was an accident." She meant it. She never once thought to question what they'd told her. The family adjusted. Betty's bedroom was moved to the first floor. Elizabeth made sure everything was wheelchair accessible. She bought special equipment. She rearranged furniture. She did whatever needed to be done to make Betty comfortable. The twins continued to help with Betty's care when they were home from college, maybe even more than before. They seemed determined to make up for what happened. Elizabeth was grateful. She didn't know what she'd do without them. Managing Betty's care alone while Noah traveled would have been overwhelming. But the boys stepped up. They fed Betty when Elizabeth was busy. They helped with her bedtime routine. They made sure she had everything she needed. Elizabeth thought she'd raised them right. She thought she'd taught them what family meant. But over the next few years, something changed in Betty. Elizabeth noticed, but she told herself it was trauma from the fall. Adjusting to life in a wheelchair wasn't easy. Betty needed time, space, patience. Elizabeth gave her all three. She never suspected that something else was happening. She never imagined that the children she loved, the family she'd built, could harbor something so dark. She went to sleep every night thinking her home was safe, that her children were protected, that the people under her roof would never hurt each other. She prayed for Betty's healing. She prayed for the family to stay strong. She never thought to pray for protection from the people already inside her home. Before you continue this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who values real stories that matter. Your support keeps this channel going, and it helps us bring more untold truths to light. Now, let's continue. December 23rd came with the kind of cold that made people bundle up tight. But in Elizabeth's neighborhood, that didn't stop anyone. The annual caroling night was a tradition no one missed. Every year, families gathered on the sidewalks with candles and songbooks, singing their way through the streets. The Fords had participated since the twins were little. Elizabeth loved this night. It reminded her why she cherished her community. It reminded her that despite everything the world threw at people, there were still moments of simple joy. Moments where neighbors became more than just people who lived next door. They became family. But this year felt different. Elizabeth couldn't name it, but something was off. She felt it the moment she started getting Betty ready. Betty seemed distant, more distant than usual. She wouldn't make eye contact. When Elizabeth tried to brush her hair, Betty flinched. "It's okay, sweetheart," Elizabeth said softly, her voice gentle. "We're just getting you ready for caroling. You love the music, remember?" But Betty didn't relax. She sat rigid in her wheelchair, her hands gripping the armrests like she was bracing herself for something. Elizabeth studied her daughter's face, trying to read what was wrong. Betty's expression was blank, empty, like she'd gone somewhere far away in her mind. Elizabeth assumed it was overstimulation. Betty didn't always handle crowds well. The lights, the noise, the people. It could be overwhelming for someone with her condition. Elizabeth made a mental note to keep the outing short. An hour at most. Maybe less if Betty seemed too uncomfortable. She didn't want to push her daughter. She just wanted Betty to feel included, to feel like part of the family, part of the neighborhood. Elizabeth zipped up Betty's coat and made sure her blanket was tucked around her legs. "There," she said, smiling down at her. "All ready. We're going to have a good time tonight, okay?" Betty didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead. Outside, the neighborhood was already alive with activity. Kids ran along the sidewalks, their breath visible in the cold air. Adults stood in clusters holding candles, their voices rising in laughter and conversation. Someone had set up a speaker playing instrumental Christmas music. The sound of it drifted through the air, mixing with the chatter and the occasional burst of a child's laughter. Elizabeth pushed Betty's wheelchair toward the group, Noah and the twins walking beside her. The twins were quieter than usual. They kept glancing at each other, whispering. Elizabeth noticed them checking their phones multiple times. "Everything okay?" she asked Jordan, her voice light. He looked up quickly, shoving his phone into his pocket. "Yeah, Mom. Just texting a friend about something." Elizabeth nodded. Young adults and their phones. Nothing unusual about that. The caroling began, and Elizabeth tried to lose herself in the music. She loved singing. It was one of the few things that made her feel completely at peace. Her voice blended with the others, rising into the night air. But tonight, her voice felt forced. She couldn't fully relax. She kept glancing down at Betty. Her daughter sat slumped in her wheelchair, her head down, staring at nothing. Elizabeth knelt beside her between songs. "You okay, baby?" she asked quietly. Betty didn't respond. She just kept staring at her lap. Elizabeth rubbed her arm gently, trying to offer comfort. "I know it's cold. We won't stay long, I promise." But Betty didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her mother's words. Elizabeth felt a pang of worry, but pushed it aside. Betty had bad days sometimes. This was just one of them. Noah was singing louder than usual, almost too enthusiastically. He laughed at jokes Elizabeth didn't find funny. He clapped people on the back like he was running for office. He seemed determined to enjoy himself. Elizabeth found it slightly odd, but she brushed it off. Maybe he was just in a good mood. The holidays did that to people. They brought out the best in some, and the stress in others. Maybe Noah was just trying to embrace the season, trying to be present. Elizabeth appreciated that about him. He worked hard. He traveled constantly. But when he was home, he made an effort. Or at least, that's what she'd always believed. At one point, Joseph moved to adjust Betty's blanket. The second his hand touched her shoulder, Betty jerked away. Her whole body went stiff. Her face twisted into something Elizabeth had never seen before. It wasn't just discomfort. It was fear. Real, raw fear. Elizabeth saw it and felt her stomach drop. "Betty?" she said, her voice rising with concern. Betty made a small sound, something between a whimper and a cry. Her hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly. Joseph stepped back immediately, his hands raised like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "I was just trying to fix her blanket," he said, his voice defensive. His face was flushed. Elizabeth looked at him, then back at Betty. "I know, honey," Elizabeth said, trying to keep her voice calm. "She's just tired." She looked at Betty, whose face was still tight with that same expression. Fear. That's what it was. Elizabeth was sure of it now. But why? Why would Betty be afraid of Joseph? He'd been helping take care of her for years. He'd never hurt her, at least not that Elizabeth knew of. She pushed the thought away. She was overthinking, reading too much into things. Betty was just having a bad night. That's all. "Let's get you home soon, okay?" Elizabeth whispered to her daughter, stroking her hair. Betty didn't respond. She just kept staring at her lap, her body still rigid. The caroling wrapped up around 9:30. Families started heading back to their houses, calling out goodbyes and wishing each other Merry Christmas. Elizabeth pushed Betty toward home, Noah and the twins following behind. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, on Betty's face, on that look of fear. She couldn't shake it. Inside, the warmth of the house was a relief. Elizabeth helped Betty out of her coat and wheeled her toward her bedroom. Betty's room was on the first floor, right off the living room. Elizabeth had insisted on that after the accident. She wanted Betty close. She wanted to hear her if she needed anything during the night. She wanted to be able to check on her easily. Elizabeth went through the usual bedtime routine. She helped Betty change into her pajamas. She tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead. "Good night, my sweet girl," she said softly. Betty didn't respond. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. Elizabeth paused, studying her daughter's face. "You okay?" she asked again, her voice gentle. Betty didn't answer. Elizabeth lingered for a moment, her hand resting on Betty's arm. She wanted to ask more questions. She wanted to understand what was wrong, but Betty couldn't tell her. She didn't have the words. Elizabeth sighed and turned off the light, leaving the door halfway open like she always did. She stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The house was quiet now. Noah had already gone to bed. The twins were in their room. Elizabeth could hear the faint sound of music coming from behind their door. She cleaned up the kitchen, putting away mugs and wiping down the counters. She was exhausted. It had been a long day. A long week, really. The holidays always were. Between shopping and cooking and making sure everything was perfect, Elizabeth barely had time to breathe. She wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and sleep. But something kept nagging at her. Betty's face. The way she'd flinched when Joseph touched her. The way she'd looked so afraid. Elizabeth shook her head. She was overthinking. She did that sometimes. Read too much into things. Betty had good days and bad days. This was just a bad day. That's all. She finished in the kitchen and headed upstairs. She checked on the twins briefly. Both were in their room with the door closed, then went to her own bedroom. Noah was already asleep, his back to her. Elizabeth changed into her pajamas and slipped under the covers. She closed her eyes and tried to let the day go. Tried to let her mind settle. But sleep didn't come easily. She kept replaying the evening in her head. The caroling, Betty's withdrawal, Joseph's reaction when Betty pulled away from him, the way the twins had been whispering to each other all night, the way Noah had seemed almost too cheerful. Everything felt off, but Elizabeth couldn't piece together why. She just knew something wasn't right. Around 11 o'clock, Elizabeth was still awake, staring at the ceiling. She heard something. A sound from downstairs, faint, muffled. She sat up, listening. There it was again, crying. Elizabeth's heart clenched. Betty. She threw off the covers and hurried downstairs, her bare feet silent on the carpet. The sound was coming from Betty's room. Elizabeth pushed the door open and flipped on the light. What she saw made her blood run cold. Betty was curled up in her bed, shaking. The sheets were stained with blood, dark red against the white fabric. Her daughter was clutching her stomach, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. The sight was so shocking, so wrong, that for a moment Elizabeth couldn't move. She just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Betty!" Elizabeth rushed to her side, her hands shaking. "Baby, what's wrong? What happened?" Betty couldn't answer. She just kept crying, her body trembling violently. Elizabeth's hands shook as she pulled back the blanket. The blood was coming from between Betty's legs. Panic shot through her like electricity. Her mind raced, trying to understand. Had Betty started her period? No, this was too much blood. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Noah!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Noah, get down here! Now!" She heard footsteps thundering down the stairs. Noah appeared in the doorway, his face confused, his hair disheveled from sleep. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice groggy. "Something's wrong with Betty." Elizabeth's voice cracked. She was trying to stay calm, but failing. "She's bleeding. We need to call an ambulance." Noah moved closer, his eyes widening when he saw the blood. "What happened? Did she fall?" he asked, his voice rising. "I don't know." Elizabeth was already reaching for her phone with shaking hands. The twins appeared. Elizabeth saw them standing there, their faces pale in the dim light. Joseph's mouth was slightly open. Jordan looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Go back to your room," Elizabeth told them, her voice sharp. But they didn't move. They just stood there, staring at Betty, staring at the blood. Elizabeth didn't have time to deal with them right now. She dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "My daughter, she's bleeding. Please, we need help." Her words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. What's your address?" Elizabeth gave it, forcing herself to slow down, to breathe. "Please hurry. Please. She's only 19. She has Down syndrome. She's in so much pain." The operator asked more questions. Where was the bleeding coming from? How much blood? Was the child conscious? Elizabeth answered as best she could, her eyes never leaving Betty. "An ambulance is on the way," the operator said. "Stay with her. Keep her as calm as possible. Help is coming." Elizabeth dropped to her knees beside Betty's bed, holding her daughter's hand. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. Help is coming. You're going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. Nothing about this felt okay. Nothing about this made sense. She looked up at Noah. He was standing frozen, staring at Betty. His face was hard to read. Was it shock? Fear? Elizabeth couldn't tell. "Noah, get her blanket. We need to keep her warm," she said, her voice urgent. He didn't move. "Noah!" Elizabeth's voice was sharp now, cutting through whatever fog he was in. He blinked and nodded, finally moving to grab a blanket from the closet. He draped it over Betty, his hands moving mechanically. Elizabeth looked toward the hallway. The twins were still standing there. Joseph's face was pale. Jordan looked like he might be sick. "I told you to go back to your room," Elizabeth said again, her voice breaking. They didn't move. They just stood there like statues, like they were rooted to the floor. The ambulance arrived within minutes, the sirens cutting through the quiet night. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and medical equipment. Elizabeth stepped aside, her hands pressed to her mouth as they examined Betty. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at Elizabeth. "We need to get her to the hospital right away," she said. "I'm coming with her," Elizabeth said immediately. There was no question, no debate. She wasn't leaving her daughter's side. "Ma'am, you can ride with us, but we need to move fast," the paramedic said. Elizabeth grabbed her coat from the hook by the door and followed them out. She climbed into the ambulance, sitting beside Betty as the paramedics worked. One of them started an IV. Another checked Betty's vitals, calling out numbers Elizabeth didn't understand. Elizabeth held her daughter's hand, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure Betty could even hear. "You're okay, baby. Mama's here. I'm not leaving you." The ambulance doors closed, and they pulled away from the house. Elizabeth looked back through the small window. Noah and the twins were standing in the driveway, watching. The red and blue lights flashed across their faces, making them look strange. Unfamiliar. Something about the way they stood there, still, silent, made Elizabeth's stomach twist. But she pushed the feeling aside. Right now, all that mattered was Betty. All that mattered was making sure her daughter was okay. The ambulance sped through the empty streets, the sirens wailing. Elizabeth held Betty's hand tighter. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't understand any of this. But she knew one thing. She would do whatever it took to help her daughter, whatever it took to make this right. The emergency room was bright and loud and overwhelming. Elizabeth hated it immediately. Nurses moved quickly, their shoes squeaking on the polished floors. Machines beeped from every direction. Somewhere down the room, someone was crying. Elizabeth stayed as close to Betty as they'd let her, refusing to leave her daughter's side. A nurse ushered them into a private examination room. Betty was placed on a bed, still crying softly, still clutching her stomach. Elizabeth stood beside her, stroking her hair with trembling fingers. "It's okay, baby. The doctors are going to help you. You're safe now." But Betty didn't look safe. She looked terrified. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, like she was seeing something Elizabeth couldn't see. A doctor entered the room a few minutes later. She was an older woman, maybe in her early 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her badge read, Dr. Michelle Hartwell. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. "Mrs. Ford?" she said gently, her voice soft. Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight. "Yes. Please, can you tell me what's wrong with my daughter?" Dr. Hartwell glanced at Betty, then back at Elizabeth. Her expression was professional, but compassionate. "I'm going to examine her now. It might be best if you step outside for just a moment." Elizabeth shook her head immediately. "No, I'm staying with her." Dr. Hartwell hesitated, studying Elizabeth's face. Then she nodded. "All right, but I'll need you to stand over here." She gestured to the corner of the room. Elizabeth moved reluctantly, her eyes never leaving Betty. Dr. Hartwell began the examination, speaking softly to Betty as she worked. Her voice was gentle, soothing. Betty whimpered and tried to pull away, but the doctor was patient. She took her time. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Hartwell stepped back. She removed her gloves slowly, deliberately. She turned to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth saw something in her face that made her stomach drop. "Mrs. Ford, I need to speak with you privately," the doctor said. Elizabeth's heart started racing. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" Dr. Hartwell's voice was steady but serious. "Please, just for a moment." Elizabeth looked at Betty, who had closed her eyes, exhausted from crying. Then she followed Dr. Hartwell into the hallway. The doctor closed the door behind them and took a deep breath. "Mrs. Ford, I need to ask you some difficult questions." Elizabeth's hands started to shake. She clenched them into fists, trying to stay calm. "What is it? What's wrong with her?" Dr. Hartwell looked her directly in the eyes. "Your daughter shows signs of recent sexual trauma." Elizabeth stared at her. The words didn't make sense. They felt foreign, wrong, like they didn't belong in a sentence about Betty. "What?" she whispered. "She's been assaulted, Mrs. Ford, recently." Elizabeth shook her head, taking a step back. "No, that's impossible. She's never alone. She's in a wheelchair. She has Down syndrome. She can't even—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too horrible, too unthinkable. Dr. Hartwell's voice was quiet but firm. "That's exactly why she's vulnerable. People with disabilities are at higher risk for abuse. They're often targeted because perpetrators believe they won't be able to report what happened." Elizabeth felt the floor tilt beneath her. She reached out and grabbed the wall to steady herself. No, you're wrong. You have to be wrong. Run the tests again. Check again. There's a mistake. Dr. Hartwell's expression was pained. I'm sorry, but there's more. She paused, and Elizabeth saw her struggle with the words. Your daughter is pregnant, approximately 8 to 10 weeks. The hallway spun. Elizabeth's vision blurred. Pregnant? The word came out as a whisper. No, that can't be. She's 19. She's... Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall. Her mind couldn't process what she was hearing. Pregnant. Betty was pregnant. Someone had done this to her. Someone had hurt her in the worst possible way. I know this is a shock, Dr. Hartwell said, kneeling beside her. But we need to notify the police. It's hospital policy in cases like this. We've already administered a rape kit. The evidence will be preserved. Elizabeth couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Betty. Her sweet, innocent Betty. Who could have done this? Who would do something so evil? Who? Elizabeth looked up at the doctor, tears streaming down her face. Who could have done this? Dr. Hartwell's voice was gentle. That's what the police will investigate. They'll want to talk to you about everyone who has access to your daughter. Family, friends, caregivers, teachers, anyone. Elizabeth nodded, but she could barely hear the words. Her mind was stuck on one thought. How did I not know? She heard footsteps and looked up. Noah was walking toward her, the twins a few steps behind. He looked worried, confused. Beth, what's going on? The nurse wouldn't tell me anything. She just said to wait and you'd... He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? Elizabeth stood abruptly, using the wall for support. Someone hurt Betty, she said, her voice breaking. The words felt wrong coming out of her mouth. Someone... She couldn't finish, couldn't say it out loud. Noah's face went pale. What do you mean? Elizabeth's voice rose, cracking with emotion. She's been assaulted. She's pregnant. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Noah just stared at her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The twins stopped walking. Elizabeth saw their faces change. Joseph looked frozen, his eyes wide. Jordan's mouth fell open, and he took a step back. Pregnant? Noah finally said. His voice was barely above a whisper. How is that possible? She's in a wheelchair. She's never alone. Elizabeth wanted to scream. I don't know, but it happened, and the police are coming. She watched Noah's face carefully. He looked shocked, genuinely shocked. But there was something else there, something she couldn't quite name. A man in a dark jacket appeared at the end of the room. He walked toward them with purpose, his badge visible on his belt. Mrs. Ford? He said. Elizabeth nodded, wiping her eyes, with the back of her hand. I'm Detective Raymond Brown. I need to ask you and your family some questions. Elizabeth felt Noah's hand on her shoulder. She looked at him. His face was concerned, supportive, the face of a husband trying to be strong for his wife. Okay, Elizabeth said quietly, her voice shaking. Detective Brown gestured toward a small conference room nearby. Let's talk in here. They followed him inside. The room was small and sterile. A table, 4 chairs, fluorescent lights overhead. The detective closed the door and pulled out a notepad. I know this is difficult, he began, his voice even and professional. But I need to understand what happened tonight. Walk me through everything. Elizabeth told him everything. The caroling, coming home, putting Betty to bed, finding her hours later. The blood, the ambulance. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it kept breaking. Detective Brown took notes, his expression neutral. He didn't interrupt. He just let her talk. When she finished, he looked up from his notepad. And you have no idea who might have had access to your daughter? Elizabeth shook her head. No. She's always with us. She goes to school during the day, but there's staff there, therapists, teachers, aides. She's never alone with anyone we don't know. Detective Brown looked at Noah. Mr. Ford, do you travel for work? Noah nodded. Yes. I'm a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. I'm on the road a few days a month, sometimes a week at a time. The detective wrote something down. And when you're gone, who takes care of Betty? Noah gestured toward Elizabeth. My wife, and the boys help. Detective Brown's eyes shifted to the twins. Joseph and Jordan sat side by side, their faces pale. They hadn't said a word since entering the room. You two help with your sister's care? He asked. They both nodded. What does that involve? Jordan spoke first, his voice quiet. We help her eat sometimes. Read to her. Help Mom with stuff around the house. Just normal brother stuff. Joseph nodded in agreement. Detective Brown wrote something else down. I see. He looked back at Elizabeth. Mrs. Ford, we're going to need to run DNA tests. It's standard procedure in cases like this. We'll start by testing the males in your household. That's typically where we begin. Elizabeth nodded immediately. Yes, of course. Test everyone. I want to know who did this. She meant it. Whoever had hurt Betty needed to be found, needed to pay for what they'd done. Noah shifted in his seat. Elizabeth glanced at him. He looked uncomfortable. You think it's someone in our house? He asked. Detective Brown's expression didn't change. We test family members first. It's just procedure. Statistically, most abuse comes from someone the victim knows, someone with regular access. Noah nodded slowly. Okay. Whatever you need. His voice was steady, but Elizabeth saw his jaw tighten. Detective Brown stood. I'll need samples from you and your sons. We can do that now. It won't take long. The three of them followed the detective out. Elizabeth stayed behind in the conference room, her head in her hands. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop replaying the doctor's words. Sexual trauma. Pregnant. 8 to 10 weeks. That meant this had been happening for months. Months. And Elizabeth hadn't known, hadn't seen it, hadn't protected her daughter. The guilt crushed her. She was Betty's mother. She was supposed to keep her safe, and she'd failed. A nurse poked her head into the room. Mrs. Ford, your daughter is being admitted for observation overnight. You can stay with her if you'd like. Elizabeth stood immediately, grateful for something to do. Yes, I'm not leaving her. She followed the nurse through the winding hallways of the hospital. Betty had been moved to a room on the 3rd floor. When Elizabeth entered, she saw her daughter lying in a hospital bed, her eyes closed. Betty looked so small, so fragile. Elizabeth pulled a chair close and sat down, taking her daughter's hand. I'm here, baby, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. But even as she said it, a terrible thought crept into her mind. Someone had done this to Betty. Someone close. Someone who had access to her. Someone who knew she couldn't fight back. Couldn't tell. Elizabeth looked at Betty's face, peaceful now in sleep, and made a silent promise. Whoever did this would pay. She would make sure of it, even if it destroyed her, even if it destroyed her family. She would find out who hurt her daughter, and they would face consequences. She sat there for hours, holding Betty's hand, watching her sleep. Noah came in eventually. He sat in the other chair, not saying anything. The twins didn't come up. Elizabeth was glad. She didn't want to see anyone right now except Betty. Around 3 in the morning, Noah spoke. The police took our DNA, he said quietly. Elizabeth nodded but didn't look at him. Good. There was a long silence. Then Noah said, Beth, I don't understand how this could have happened. Who would... Elizabeth cut him off. I don't know, but we're going to find out. Her voice was hard, determined. Noah fell silent. They sat there together but separately, both lost in their own thoughts, both trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. But one thing was clear. Elizabeth would not rest until she understood what truly happened. Elizabeth brought Betty home from the hospital on Christmas Day. the day families were supposed to gather around trees and open presents and celebrate. Instead, Elizabeth was wheeling her daughter through the front door of a house that suddenly felt foreign. Betty was quiet, more quiet than usual. The doctors had given Elizabeth a list of follow-up appointments, specialists to see, tests to run. Elizabeth had nodded and taken the papers, but she barely looked at them. Her mind was somewhere else, stuck on the question that kept repeating, who did this? The twins were home when they arrived. Elizabeth saw them standing as she pushed Betty inside. They looked different somehow, smaller. Joseph's face was pale, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. Jordan wouldn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hi, Mom," Joseph said quietly. His voice cracked. Elizabeth didn't respond. She just wheeled Betty past them toward her room. She heard them shuffle back toward their own room, their footsteps heavy on the stairs. They'd been quiet since that night, barely coming out, barely eating. Noah said they were in shock. Elizabeth supposed that made sense. Finding out your sister had been assaulted would be traumatic for anyone. Noah was working from home. At least that's what he said he was doing. Elizabeth saw him in his office, door half closed, staring at his computer screen. But she never heard him on calls. Never heard the usual sounds of him typing or talking to clients. He seemed distracted, distant. When she asked if he was okay, he'd nod and say he was fine, just trying to process everything. Elizabeth understood. She was trying to process it too, trying to make sense of how someone had gotten to Betty, how someone had hurt her without anyone noticing. The guilt was eating her alive. She was Betty's mother. She should have known. She should have seen something. Elizabeth barely slept those 2 days. She stayed in Betty's room most of the time, sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching her daughter sleep. Betty seemed more peaceful at home than she had at the hospital. Her face relaxed, her breathing calm. But every time Elizabeth looked at her, all she could think about was what had been done to her. Who had touched her? Who had violated her? The rage would build in her chest until she felt like she couldn't breathe. Then the guilt would crash over her again, and she'd be back to blaming herself. It was a cycle she couldn't escape. On Christmas Day, around 2:30 in the afternoon, Elizabeth's phone rang. She was in the kitchen making tea, trying to force herself to eat something. She hadn't had a proper meal in days. Her stomach rejected everything. When she saw the caller ID, Detective Brown, her heart started racing. She answered immediately. "Hello?" Her voice came out hoarse. "Mrs. Ford, this is Detective Brown. I need you and your husband to come to the station. Now." Elizabeth gripped the phone tighter. "Did you find who did this? Do you know who hurt Betty?" There was a pause on the other end. "We need to discuss this in person. Can you be here in 30 minutes? Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. Something about his tone. Something about the way he wouldn't answer her question directly. "Yes, we'll be there." She hung up and called for Noah. He came down from his office, his face questioning. "The police want us at the station," Elizabeth said. "Now." Noah's expression shifted. Was it concern? Fear? Elizabeth couldn't tell. "Did they say why?" he asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "Just that they need to talk to us. About the DNA results, I think." Noah nodded slowly. "Okay, let me get my coat." Elizabeth called her sister Rachel to come stay with Betty. Rachel arrived within 15 minutes, her face full of worry. Elizabeth hugged her briefly, gave her instructions, and then she and Noah were in the car, driving toward the police station in silence. Elizabeth stared out the window, her mind racing. They found someone. They must have. That's why they wanted them to come in. They were going to tell her who hurt Betty, and then Elizabeth would finally have answers. The police station was cold and industrial. Elizabeth hated the way it smelled, like old coffee and cleaning supplies. They were led to a small room with a table and 4 chairs. Detective Brown was already there, along with a woman Elizabeth hadn't met before. Mrs. Ford, Mr. Ford, this is Detective Lydia Wilkerson. She's been assisting with the case. Elizabeth nodded, barely registering the introduction. She just wanted them to tell her, to get to the point. Please sit, Detective Brown said, gesturing to the chairs. Elizabeth and Noah sat across from the detectives. There was a manila folder on the table between them. Elizabeth stared at it. That folder had answers. She was sure of it. Detective Brown opened the folder slowly. Too slowly. Elizabeth wanted to reach across the table and grab it from him. The DNA results came back, he said. His voice was even. Professional. Elizabeth leaned forward. Who is it? Who hurt my daughter? Detective Brown looked at Detective Wilkerson, then back at Elizabeth. Mrs. Ford, the DNA belongs to your sons, both of them. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Elizabeth stared at him. The words didn't make sense. She heard them, but they didn't connect. What? She whispered. Detective Wilkerson spoke this time. The pregnancy resulted from assault by Joseph and Jordan. Both of their DNA was found. Elizabeth started laughing. She couldn't help it. The sound came out of her before she could stop it. Hysterical, disbelieving laughter. That's impossible. You made a mistake. Detective Brown's face didn't change. We tested twice, Mrs. Ford. The results are conclusive. Elizabeth stopped laughing. Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. No, that can't be right. They're her brothers. They helped take care of her. They would never... She turned to Noah. Tell them they're wrong. Tell them. Noah just sat there. His face was blank, unreadable. He didn't say anything. Noah! Elizabeth's voice rose. Say something. Tell them they made a mistake. Noah finally looked at her. I don't understand, he said slowly. When would they have even had the opportunity? His response felt wrong, too careful, too measured, like he was thinking about his answer instead of reacting. Elizabeth stared at him. Why wasn't he defending their sons? Why wasn't he angry? Elizabeth's world was collapsing. She felt it crumbling around her piece by piece. This can't be real, she whispered. They're good boys. They're good kids. They wouldn't... Detective Brown leaned forward. Mrs. Ford, I know this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. We need to bring your sons in for questioning. Elizabeth felt her stomach lurch. She grabbed the trash can beside the table and vomited. Her body heaved, but there was nothing in her stomach, just bile. Detective Wilkerson stood and got her a bottle of water. Elizabeth's hand shook so badly she could barely open it. She was hyperventilating. The room spun. She heard someone call for a paramedic. Someone put an oxygen mask on her face. Breathe, Mrs. Ford. Just breathe. But she couldn't. Her boys. Her sons. The children she'd raised. They'd done this? A paramedic offered her a sedative. Elizabeth shook her head violently. No, I need to think. I need to understand. Detective Brown waited until Elizabeth's breathing slowed. We're going to bring Joseph and Jordan in now. We'll question them separately. You're welcome to stay, but I'd advise you to go home and wait. Elizabeth shook her head. I'm staying. Noah put his hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. She didn't want him touching her. Didn't want anyone touching her. The detectives left the room, leaving Elizabeth and Noah alone. Elizabeth turned to him. How? She asked. How did this happen? Noah looked at her, his face tired. I don't know, Beth. I really don't know. But Elizabeth was starting to wonder if that was true. She was starting to wonder about a lot of things. An hour passed, maybe more. Elizabeth lost track of time. She sat in that cold room, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what she'd been told. Joseph and Jordan, her boys, her babies. How could they have done this? She'd raised them better than that, hadn't she? She thought about all the times they'd helped with Betty, all the times she'd praised them for being so caring, so responsible. Had she been blind? Had she missed something? She must have. She must have been so focused on Betty's needs that she didn't see what was happening right in front of her. Then she heard it, a voice from down the hall, crying. She stood up and walked to the door, opening it slightly. The sound was coming from one of the interrogation rooms. She recognized the voice. Jordan. "We didn't mean to hurt her," he was saying between sobs. "Dad said she wouldn't understand. Dad said it was okay because she couldn't tell anyone." Elizabeth froze. "Dad said?" She pushed the door open wider, stepping into the hallway. An officer tried to stop her, but she shoved past him. "What did you say?" she screamed toward the interrogation room. "What do you mean, Dad said?" Officers grabbed her, holding her back. She fought against them, her voice breaking. "Let me in there. Let me talk to him." "What do you mean, Dad said?" Detective Brown appeared, his face serious. "Mrs. Ford, you need to calm down." Elizabeth was sobbing now. "He said Dad said." "What does that mean? What does that mean?" Detective Brown looked past her, toward Noah. Elizabeth turned. Noah was standing in the doorway of the conference room, his face white. Detective Wilkerson approached him. "Mr. Ford, we need to talk." Noah took a step back. "I don't know what he's talking about. I didn't—" But Detective Wilkerson was already reading him his rights. "Noah Ford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit sexual assault and child endangerment." Noah's eyes went wide. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything." Elizabeth felt like she was watching a movie. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. An officer put handcuffs on Noah. He looked at Elizabeth, his face pleading. "Beth, you have to believe me. I didn't know what they were doing, I swear." But Elizabeth just stared at him. "Jordan said you told them it was okay," she said quietly. Noah shook his head. "He's lying. He's confused. He's trying to blame me." Elizabeth's voice rose. "How long?" she asked. Noah looked confused. "What?" Elizabeth screamed it this time. "How long did you know?" Noah didn't answer. They led him away, his head down. Elizabeth stood in the hallway, her body shaking. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. Her sons, her husband, her family, all of it. A lie. Detective Brown guided her back to the conference room. "Mrs. Ford, I think you should go home. We'll contact you when we have more information." Elizabeth nodded numbly. She couldn't speak, couldn't think. She walked out of the police station in a daze, got in her car, drove home. She didn't remember the drive. 1 minute she was at the station, the next she was sitting in her driveway, staring at her house. Rachel came out when she saw the car. "Elizabeth, what happened? Where's Noah?" Elizabeth looked at her sister. "They arrested him," she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. "And the boys, they arrested all of them." Rachel's face went pale. "What? Why?" Elizabeth couldn't say it, couldn't form the words. She just shook her head and walked past Rachel into the house. Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now let's continue. Elizabeth couldn't stay in the house. Rachel was there with Betty, which meant her daughter was safe. But Elizabeth felt like the walls were closing in. She needed air, space. She ended up in Noah's office. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the one room in the house that felt separate from everything else, separate from the life she thought she'd been living. She sat in Noah's chair and stared at his desk. Everything was so neat, so organized, files stacked perfectly, pens in a holder, his laptop closed and centered. It looked like the desk of a man who had his life together, a man who was in control. Elizabeth's eyes fell on Noah's phone. It was sitting on the charger by his computer. He'd left it behind when they arrested him. She stared at it for a long moment. She'd never gone through Noah's phone before. Never felt the need to. She trusted him. Or at least, she had. Now she didn't know what to trust. Jordan's words kept echoing in her head. Dad said it was okay. What did that mean? What had Noah said? What had he done? Elizabeth reached for the phone. Her hands were shaking. She typed in the passcode. Their anniversary. The phone unlocked. For a moment, she just stared at the home screen. Then she started looking. His text messages seemed normal. Conversations with coworkers. Messages about meetings and sales targets. Nothing unusual. His email was the same. Work stuff. Newsletters. Spam. Elizabeth felt a flicker of relief. Maybe Jordan had been confused. Maybe he'd misunderstood something Noah said. Maybe this was all a terrible mistake. Then she noticed something. An app on the second page of his home screen. It looked like a calculator. She almost scrolled past it. But something made her stop. She clicked on it. A password screen appeared. Elizabeth's heart started racing. Why would a calculator app need a password? She tried their anniversary. Wrong. She tried Betty's birthday. Wrong. She tried the twins' birthday. The app opened. It wasn't a calculator. It was a hidden folder. And inside were photos. Hundreds of them. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. She clicked on the first one. It was Betty. Betty in her bed. Betty without clothes. Betty in a position that made Elizabeth want to scream. She clicked on another. And another. Each one worse than the last. The dates on the photos went back 3 years. 3 years. Elizabeth felt bile rise in her throat. She dropped the phone like it had burned her. Then she picked it up again. She needed to see. She needed to know. She scrolled through the photos, her vision blurring with tears. Betty. Her sweet, innocent Betty. How had she not known? How had she not seen? Then she found the videos. The first one made her vomit right there on the office floor. It was Noah, with Betty, doing things Elizabeth couldn't even process. Betty was crying silently in the video, shaking her head. Noah's voice was soft, almost gentle. Shh, you're okay. You're a good girl. Elizabeth wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to smash it into pieces, but she couldn't stop watching. She needed to see, needed to understand the full extent of what had been done. The next video was dated 6 months ago. It showed the twins, both of them, with Betty. But what made Elizabeth's blood run cold was the voice behind the camera. Noah's voice. He was filming. He was giving instructions. Hold her like this. She can't fight back anyway. The twins looked uncomfortable, unsure. But they were doing it. They were listening to him. Noah's voice continued. This is normal. This is what families do when they love each other. Elizabeth screamed. The sound tore out of her throat, raw and broken. She couldn't stop screaming. Rachel burst into the office, her eyes wide with panic. Elizabeth, what's wrong? Elizabeth couldn't speak. She just handed Rachel the phone. Rachel looked at the screen. Her face went white. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was sobbing now. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. He did this. He did this to her. And I didn't know. I didn't see it. Rachel put the phone down and pulled Elizabeth into her arms. This isn't your fault. You couldn't have known. But Elizabeth couldn't accept that. She should have known. A mother should know when her child is being hurt. After Rachel left to check on Betty, Elizabeth forced herself to keep looking through the phone. She had to know everything. She found more folders. Files she wished she could unsee. Then she found something that made her sick in a whole new way. Secret accounts, usernames she didn't recognize. Special daddy, patient teacher. She clicked on one of them. It took her to a website, a pornographic site, but not just any site. A site specifically for content featuring disabled people. Elizabeth's hands shook as she scrolled through Noah's profile. He'd been uploading videos of Betty. The comments underneath made her want to die. More content like this. Love the disability angle. She's perfect. People were paying to watch this. paying Noah to watch him abuse their daughter. Elizabeth clicked on Noah's account settings. Payment history. Her stomach dropped. $3,000 in January, $4,000 in February, $5,000 in March, month after month, for 3 years. Noah had been making money off of Betty's abuse. He'd been selling her. Elizabeth couldn't breathe. She stood up and stumbled to the window, pushing it open, gasping for air. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The evidence was right there on his phone. Noah hadn't just abused Betty. He'd profited from it. He'd turned their daughter into a source of income, and he'd dragged their sons into it. Elizabeth's grief turned to rage. Pure, white-hot rage. She went back to the phone, kept digging, found deleted text messages that had been backed up to the cloud. A group chat between Noah and the twins. The name of the chat made her sick. Team Ford. She opened it. The messages went back 2 years. Noah's texts were casual, almost cheerful, teaching the twins how to manipulate Betty. She can't tell Mom. She doesn't have the words. Another message. If she tries to show Mom something's wrong, just say she's having a bad day. Another. Make sure you delete everything after. Elizabeth read through months of messages. Noah had groomed them. Slowly. Carefully. He'd normalized the abuse. Made them think it was okay. Made them think it was normal. Then she found the payment records. Cash transfers from Noah to the twins. $200 here. $500 there. The dates matched up with the videos. Noah had been paying them, bribing them to participate, bribing them to stay silent. Elizabeth wanted to scream again, but she had no voice left. She kept scrolling, found messages from 3 years ago, around the time Betty's accident happened. A text from Noah to the twins. The stairs worked. She won't be able to run away anymore. Elizabeth dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a crack. The accident wasn't an accident. They'd pushed her, on purpose, to make her more vulnerable, to make her easier to control, to take away any chance she had of escaping. Elizabeth's scream brought Rachel running back into the office. What? What is it? Elizabeth pointed at the phone, unable to speak. Rachel picked it up and read the message, her face crumpled. They did this to her on purpose, Elizabeth managed to say. They paralyzed her so she couldn't get away. Rachel looked like she might be sick. We need to call the police. We need to give them this phone. Elizabeth nodded, but she wasn't done looking. Not yet. She took the phone back from Rachel and kept searching. Found more accounts. Reddit. Dark web forums. Noah had been active on them, asking for advice, sharing techniques, talking to other predators, other people who were doing the same things he was doing. This wasn't something he'd stumbled into. This was planned, researched. He'd spent years preparing for this. Elizabeth sat on the floor of the office, surrounded by evidence of her husband's crimes. Her entire life had been a lie. Every moment of their marriage, every family dinner, every church service, every Christmas morning. All of it had been happening while Noah was abusing their daughter, while he was selling her to strangers online, while he was turning their sons into copies of himself. Elizabeth felt something break inside her. Not just her heart, something deeper, something fundamental. She'd spent her whole life trying to be good, trying to do the right thing, trying to protect people. And she'd failed. She'd failed in the worst possible way. She thought about Betty, about all the times Betty had tried to tell her, the drawings, the agitation, the fear in her eyes. Elizabeth had dismissed all of it. She'd told herself Betty was just having bad days, just struggling with her disabilities. She'd been so blind, so stupid. The guilt was crushing, but underneath the guilt was something else. Rage, white-hot, all-consuming rage. Noah had done this. Noah had orchestrated all of it, and he'd almost gotten away with it. If Betty hadn't bled that night, Elizabeth might never have known. The abuse might have continued for years. The thought made her want to destroy everything in sight. Elizabeth pulled herself together enough to call Detective Brown. Her voice was flat when he answered. "I found Noah's phone. You need to see what's on it." She gave him a brief summary. The photos, the videos, the online accounts, the money, the messages. By the time she finished, Detective Brown was silent on the other end. "We're sending officers to collect the phone now. Mrs. Ford, you should leave the house. Go stay with your sister. This is now an active crime scene." Elizabeth hung up without responding. She wasn't going anywhere. This was her house, her life, her family. She wasn't running from it. She sat in that office until the police arrived, handed over the phone without a word, watched them take photographs of everything, bag evidence, turn her home into a crime scene. When they finally left, it was after midnight. Elizabeth walked through the house like a ghost. Everything looked the same. The couch where they'd watched movies, the kitchen where she'd made thousands of meals, the dining room table where they'd said grace before dinner, all of it exactly the same. But nothing would ever be the same again. Elizabeth ended up in Betty's room. Her daughter was asleep, her face peaceful. Elizabeth sat beside her bed and took her hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Betty didn't wake up. Elizabeth sat there in the dark, holding her daughter's hand, and made a promise. Noah would pay for what he'd done. One way or another, he would pay. Elizabeth didn't sleep that night, or the next. By the morning of December 26th, she'd been awake for over 48 hours. Her mind wouldn't shut off. She kept seeing the videos, the photos, the messages, Noah's face, his voice, the twins' faces, Betty crying. It played on a loop in her head, over and over, until she thought she might lose her mind. Rachel kept trying to get her to eat, to rest. Elizabeth refused. She couldn't eat, couldn't rest. All she could do was think about what had been done to her daughter and about what she was going to do about it. At 2:47 in the morning, Elizabeth was still sitting in Noah's office. The police had taken his phone, but they'd given her printed copies of some of the evidence for the case. Elizabeth had spread it all out on the floor around her. Photos, messages, payment records, everything. She stared at it all, her mind working through the timeline. 3 years. Noah had been doing this for 3 years, and he'd been so careful, so methodical. He'd covered his tracks. He'd manipulated everyone around him. He'd made sure Elizabeth was never around when it happened. He'd groomed the twins slowly, carefully, so they wouldn't resist, so they wouldn't tell. He'd even made money off of it. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Elizabeth thought about the justice system, about how these things usually went. Noah would get a lawyer, a good one. His parents had money. They'd already posted his bail. He'd be out soon. And then what? He'd fight the charges. He'd claim it was all a misunderstanding. He'd say the boys were lying. He'd say Elizabeth was crazy. He'd find ways to delay the trial, to poke holes in the evidence, to create reasonable doubt. Elizabeth had seen it before, back when she was a social worker. She'd seen men like Noah walk free, seen them get light sentences, seen them get out early and do it all over again. The thought made her sick. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't. Around 10 that morning, Noah had his bail hearing. Elizabeth watched it on her laptop via Zoom. She sat at the kitchen table, her face blank, as Noah's lawyer stood up and spoke. He was good, professional. He painted Noah as a respected member of the community, a devoted father and husband, a man with no prior record. "Your Honor, my client is not a flight risk. He's cooperating fully with the investigation. He has ties to this community. His family is here. He deserves the opportunity to prepare his defense from home." The prosecutor pushed back, talked about the severity of the charges, the evidence against him. But the judge wasn't swayed. Bail was set at $500,000. Noah's parents posted it immediately. He'd be released that afternoon. Elizabeth closed her laptop and sat very still. Noah was coming home. Not to stay. He'd have to live with his parents while awaiting trial, but he'd be coming back to collect his belongings. and Elizabeth would be here. She stood up and walked to Noah's office, to his gun safe. She knew the combination, their wedding date. How fitting. She opened the safe and took out his handgun. It was registered, legal. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she held it now, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It felt heavier than she'd expected. She carried it to the living room and tucked it behind a couch cushion. Then she sat down and waited. Detective Brown called around 2 in the afternoon. "Mrs. Ford, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Ford is being released. He'll be coming by the house around 4 to collect some things. We'll have officers there to supervise." Elizabeth's voice was calm. Too calm. "Okay. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up. Rachel came into the room. "Elizabeth, maybe you should go out for a bit. You don't need to be here when he comes." Elizabeth shook her head. "I'm staying." Rachel looked worried. "I don't think that's a good idea." Elizabeth didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the door, waiting. At 4:15, a police car pulled up outside. Elizabeth watched through the window as Noah got out. He was wearing the same clothes he'd been arrested in. He looked tired, thinner, but he was walking free. Detective Brown and 2 officers walked with him to the door. Elizabeth opened it before they could knock. Noah's eyes met hers. "Beth," he said. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "We need to talk. Let me explain." Elizabeth stepped back and let them all inside. She didn't say anything, just stood there, watching Noah. He looked around the house like he was seeing it for the first time, or maybe for the last time. "I just need to grab some clothes and a few things," he said. "Then I'll be out of your way." Elizabeth's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Explain what, Noah?" He turned to look at her. "Explain how you raped our daughter for 3 years?" Noah flinched. "Beth, please. You don't understand." Elizabeth took a step toward him. "Explain how you turned our sons into rapists." Noah held up his hands. "It's not like that. You're making it sound worse than it is." Elizabeth felt rage bubble up inside her. "Explain how you paralyzed her so she couldn't escape?" Noah's face went pale. "That was an accident. The boys didn't mean—" Elizabeth cut him off. "Explain how you sold videos of her abuse online for profit?" Noah's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Detective Brown, then back at Elizabeth. "You went through my phone," he said. His voice had changed, gone cold, accusatory, like Elizabeth was the one who'd done something wrong. "Your phone?" Elizabeth's voice rose. "You're worried about your phone?" Noah took a step toward her. "You had no right to go through my private—" Elizabeth laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "Your privacy? You're talking about privacy after what you did?" Noah's face hardened. "You don't understand. She doesn't understand anyway. She's happy. You're making this into something it's not." Elizabeth felt like she'd been slapped. "What did you just say?" Noah's voice was calm now. Too calm. "Beth, you need to think about this logically. Betty doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't have the capacity to—" Elizabeth interrupted him. "To what? To be traumatized? To feel pain? To be violated?" Noah sighed like Elizabeth was being difficult. "You were never going to give me what I needed. Someone had to." The words hung in the air. Elizabeth stared at him. This was the man she'd been married to for 23 years. The man she'd built a life with. The man she'd trusted with everything. And he was standing in front of her, justifying what he'd done, justifying the abuse of their daughter. Noah kept talking. "The boys were going to find out about sex eventually. Better I taught them with someone safe, someone who couldn't cause problems." Elizabeth felt her hands start to shake. "And those people online?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The ones paying to watch you abuse her?" Noah shrugged. They were going to watch that content anyway. Might as well profit from it. Every word was like gasoline on a fire. Elizabeth felt the rage building until she thought she might explode. Detective Brown stepped forward. "Mr. Ford, I'd advise you to stop talking." But Noah wasn't done. He looked at Elizabeth, his eyes cold. "You should have paid more attention. You were so focused on being the perfect mother, the perfect volunteer, the perfect Christian. You never noticed what was actually happening in your own house." Elizabeth took another step toward him. "So, this is my fault?" Noah tilted his head. "I'm just saying, if you'd been more present, more aware." He didn't get to finish the sentence. Elizabeth reached behind the couch cushion. Her hand found the gun. She pulled it out. "Mrs. Ford!" Detective Brown's voice was sharp. "Put the weapon down." The two officers moved toward her, their hands on their own guns. But Elizabeth wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Noah. His eyes had gone wide. "Beth, don't be stupid," he said. But there was fear in his voice now. Real fear. "You don't get to walk out of here," Elizabeth said. Her voice was steady, eerily steady. "You don't get to hire lawyers and make deals and serve 5 years and get out and do this to someone else's daughter." Noah backed toward the door. "You won't do it. You're not capable of—" Elizabeth fired. The sound was deafening in the small room. Noah dropped, screaming. The bullet had hit his right thigh. Blood spread across his pants. Elizabeth stood over him, the gun still in her hand. "That's for Betty," she said. Her voice was calm, almost serene. "That's for every night she cried and I didn't know why. That's for the daughter I couldn't protect." Officers rushed her. One grabbed her arm, twisting it until she dropped the gun. Another pushed her to the ground, pinning her there. Elizabeth didn't fight. She'd done what she came to do. As they handcuffed her, she looked at Noah. He was on the floor, clutching his leg, his face twisted in pain. Paramedics were already rushing in. Detective Brown was on his phone, calling for backup. Everything was chaos. But Elizabeth felt calm. For the first time in days, she felt calm. As the officers pulled her to her feet, Elizabeth looked at Detective Brown. "Check his phone," she said. "Give everything to the prosecutor. Make sure everyone knows what he is. Make sure they know he sold her online." Detective Brown nodded. "We have everything, Mrs. Ford." They led her toward the door. Noah was screaming behind her. "She tried to kill me. She's insane. Arrest her." Detective Brown knelt beside him. "Mr. Ford, you're under arrest for multiple counts of first-degree rape of a minor, production and distribution of child exploitation material, conspiracy, and child abuse. Your wife shot you in the leg. You confessed to years of sexual abuse and profiting from it on camera. I'd say you got off easy." Outside, news vans were already gathering. Someone must have called them. Elizabeth saw cameras and reporters shouting questions. The officers put her in the back of a police car. As they drove away, Elizabeth looked back at the house. Rachel was standing in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Elizabeth hoped she'd take care of Betty. Hoped Betty would be okay. She'd done what she had to do. What any mother would want to do. And she didn't regret it. Not for a second. The interrogation room was small and cold. Elizabeth had been sitting there for 3 hours. They'd processed her, read her rights, charged her with assault with a deadly weapon. Her lawyer, Maria Henderson, had arrived an hour ago, a sharp woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude. She'd advised Elizabeth to stay quiet, to wait until they could discuss strategy. But Elizabeth didn't want to stay quiet. She had things to say, things that needed to be said. When Detective Brown and Detective Wilkerson finally entered the room, Elizabeth sat up straighter. "I want to talk," she said before they could say anything. Maria put a hand on her arm. "Elizabeth, I'd advise—" Elizabeth shook her head. "I need to tell them everything. Not for me, for Betty. So everyone knows what was done to her." Detective Brown sat down across from her. Detective Wilkerson took the seat beside him. They both looked tired. "Mrs. Ford, you understand you've been charged with a serious crime," Detective Brown said. Elizabeth nodded. "I shot him. I know what I did. And I'll tell you why. But first, you need to understand everything. You need to know the whole story." Maria sighed but didn't stop her. Elizabeth took a deep breath and began. She told them about the adoption process, about how they'd tried to adopt 3 other girls before Betty, how each time Noah had found a reason to say no. The first girl was too chatty, Elizabeth said. Too many questions. The second had too much family. The third was too integrated into her community. I thought he was being cautious, but he wasn't. He was looking for the perfect victim. She told them about Betty, about how Noah had immediately agreed to adopt her. She was nonverbal. She had Down syndrome. She had no family checking in on her. She was exactly what he'd been looking for. Someone who couldn't tell. Elizabeth's voice cracked. I thought it was love. I thought he finally felt ready to be a father to a daughter, but it was predation. He'd spent years searching for her. Detective Wilkerson took notes. Her face was carefully neutral, but Elizabeth saw something in her eyes. Sympathy. Maybe anger. Elizabeth continued. She told them about the messages she'd found on Noah's phone, the ones about Betty's accident. They pushed her, Elizabeth said, on purpose. Noah told them to. Because Betty had started trying to tell me something was wrong, she'd draw pictures. Point at Noah, get agitated. So he decided to make her more vulnerable, more controllable. She told them about Noah's past, about the things she'd discovered in his online searches. He'd been fascinated by this kind of content since he was young. He told a colleague once years ago that he wondered what it would be like with a teenager. The colleague thought it was a joke, but Noah meant it. He just didn't know how to access a victim safely. Until Betty. Elizabeth's hands were shaking. She clasped them together. He spent years planning this, researching, preparing. He didn't just abuse her on impulse. It was systematic. Detective Brown leaned forward. Tell us about the online activity. Elizabeth's voice went flat. He was selling her. On pornographic websites that specialize in disabled victims. He made thousands of dollars every month. People would pay to watch him abuse her. They'd request specific things and he'd film them. Betty wasn't just his victim, she was his product. The detectives exchanged a look. Detective Wilkerson spoke this time. And the twins? Elizabeth felt tears start to fall. He groomed them. It started when they were 18. Joseph walked in on Noah abusing Betty. Instead of stopping, Noah brought him into it. Taught him. Made him think it was normal. Then he did the same with Jordan. Over months he desensitized them. Told them Betty liked it. Told them she didn't feel things the same way other people did. Paid them money to keep them compliant. Showed them content from online forums to normalize it. He turned my boys into monsters. Her voice broke. They didn't start out that way. He made them that way. She told them about the system Noah had created, the coded schedules, the way he'd made sure Elizabeth was never home during the abuse. He'd send me on errands, church volunteering, grocery shopping, visiting my mother. He'd text the twins with code words. Betty needs her bath. Betty needs her bedtime routine. And I never knew. I thought they were just helping out. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. Betty tried to tell me. So many times. The drawings. The refusal to eat. The agitation during bath time. She'd try to use her tablet to communicate. But I thought it was just sensory issues. Bad days. I didn't see what was right in front of me. I failed her. She was sobbing now. Every single day for 3 years I failed her. Detective Brown handed her a tissue. Mrs. Ford, you couldn't have known. He was very careful. Elizabeth shook her head. I should have known. I was her mother. I should have protected her. She told them about the pregnancy, about the doctors recommending termination because Betty's body couldn't handle it. She's 19 and she has Down syndrome. The pregnancy could kill her. But she doesn't understand what's happening. She doesn't understand why her body is changing. She thinks she's in trouble. She thinks I'm angry at her. Elizabeth's voice rose. Do you understand what that does to a mother? To know your child thinks you're mad at her when she's the victim? She told them about Noah's online networks, the forums where he'd talk to other predators, shared techniques, asked for advice on managing disabled family members. He was part of a community of people who do this. People who target vulnerable victims because they know they can't fight back, can't tell. The FBI needs to find them. All of them. Detective Wilkerson nodded. We're working on it. Multiple agencies are involved now. Elizabeth looked directly at Detective Brown. Do you understand why I shot him? Detective Brown's expression was unreadable. Tell me. Elizabeth's voice was steady now. Because he was going to get away with it. He has money. His parents posted $500,000 bail like it was nothing. He'll hire the best lawyers. He'll fight every charge. He'll claim it was a misunderstanding. He'll say the boys are lying. He'll say I'm crazy. He'll create reasonable doubt. And maybe he'd get convicted. But how long would he serve? 5 years? 10? And then he'd get out. And he'd do it again. To someone else's daughter. She leaned forward. I couldn't risk that. I couldn't let Betty see him walk free and think that what he did was acceptable. I couldn't let him keep profiting from her pain. So I shot him. Not to kill him. If I wanted him dead, he'd be dead. I shot him because I wanted him to feel pain, to understand consequences, to be marked, so that for the rest of his life, he'll have a scar that reminds him of what he did. Detective Wilkerson asked the question Elizabeth knew was coming. Do you regret it? Elizabeth didn't hesitate. I regret not knowing sooner. I regret every day I left Betty alone with them. I regret not seeing the signs. But shooting Noah? No, I don't regret that. She told them about everything she'd found on Noah's phone, every video, every message, every payment. I want it all entered as evidence. I want it public. I want everyone to know what he is, what he did. I don't care if it destroys my privacy. I don't care if it makes me look bad. Betty deserves for the truth to be told. Maria tried to interject. Elizabeth, that might not be in your best interest legally. Elizabeth cut her off. I don't care about my best interest. I care about Betty. I care about making sure Noah never has the chance to do this to another child. She looked back at the detectives. I've given you all his passwords, access to all his devices, everything. Use it. Make sure he never gets out. The clinical detachment Elizabeth had maintained finally cracked. Betty used to smile all the time, she said, her voice breaking. She loved music. She'd get so excited when I'd put on her favorite songs. She loved when I read to her. She'd make these little happy sounds. She was such a joyful person despite everything she'd been through. And now she flinches when anyone touches her. She has nightmares. She screams in her sleep. She's pregnant with her brother's child, and she doesn't understand why her body is hurting. She thinks she did something wrong. She thinks I'm angry at her. Elizabeth buried her face in her hands. He destroyed her. He destroyed my daughter. And I didn't stop it. I didn't even see it. Detective Wilkerson's voice was gentle. Mrs. Ford, you need to understand something. In my 20 years doing this job, I've never seen abuse this systematic, this planned. Noah Ford spent years setting this up. He manipulated everyone around him. You, the twins, your church, your community. He was very, very good at hiding what he was doing. Detective Brown nodded. The shooting, I can't officially condone it. But as a father, I get it. I'd want to do worse. Elizabeth looked up at them. What happens now? Detective Brown stood. We'll continue building the case against Noah and your sons. The evidence you provided will be instrumental. As for you, you'll be arraigned. Your lawyer will argue your case. But Mrs. Ford, I have to be honest. You shot someone. There will be consequences. Elizabeth nodded. I know, and I'll accept them, as long as Betty is safe, as long as Noah pays for what he did. That's all I care about. They took her back to her cell after that. Elizabeth sat on the hard bed and stared at the wall. She thought about Betty, about how she was probably wondering where her mother was. Elizabeth hoped Rachel was taking good care of her, hoped Betty didn't think Elizabeth had abandoned her. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for herself, for Betty. that she'd heal, that she'd be okay, that somehow, someday, she'd be able to smile again. And for Noah, she prayed he'd suffer every single day for the rest of his life. That seemed like the least he deserved. The days following Elizabeth's confession blurred together. December 27th through 30th became a whirlwind of law enforcement activity. The case had exploded beyond the local police department's capacity to handle alone. The FBI got involved once they saw the extent of Noah's online operations. Federal agents in dark suits showed up at the station, their faces grim as they reviewed the evidence. This wasn't just a local crime anymore. This was interstate distribution of child exploitation material. This was organized predation. This was bigger than anyone had initially realized. Computer forensics teams worked around the clock going through Noah's devices. What they found made even seasoned investigators sick to their stomachs. 7 different cloud storage accounts, each one carefully hidden, each one password protected, each one containing thousands of files. When they tallied everything up, the number was staggering, over 10,000 images and videos. The dates on the oldest files went back 5 years. That was before Betty's adoption had even been finalized, before she'd even moved into the Ford house. Noah had been planning this from the very beginning. He documented his intentions, his preparations, his research. Everything was there, laid out in digital files that proved this wasn't some impulse. This was premeditation at its most disturbing. The FBI agent leading the digital investigation was a woman named Sandra Mitchell. She'd been doing this work for 15 years and thought she'd seen everything, but even she had to take breaks while reviewing Noah's files. "This is one of the most organized operations I've ever seen," she told Detective Brown during one of their briefings. "He wasn't just abusing his daughter. He was running a business." The evidence backed up her assessment. Noah had been active on multiple pornographic platforms that specialized in exploitation content. His account history showed systematic uploads starting the month Betty moved into the house. He had a pricing structure: $50 per video for standard content, $200 for custom requests where subscribers could tell him what they wanted to see. He had over 200 active paying members, people from all over the country, some international, all of them paying to watch Betty's abuse. Agent Mitchell's team traced the money. Noah had been depositing his earnings into offshore accounts Elizabeth had never known existed. Over 3 years, he'd made approximately $180,000. That number hit Elizabeth like a punch to the gut when Detective Brown told her. Nearly $200,000 from selling her daughter. The financial forensics team found records of Noah's purchases too. Recording equipment, high-quality cameras, lighting, soundproofing materials for Betty's room that he'd installed one weekend when Elizabeth was visiting her mother. Locks that could be activated from the inside so no one could walk in unexpectedly. He'd even taken out a life insurance policy on Betty 2 years ago. $500,000. If Betty had died, Noah would have profited even more. The research in Noah's browser history was extensive and disturbing. He'd spent years studying how to be a better predator, how to induce falls and injuries that would look accidental, medical conditions that increased vulnerability in disabled individuals, legal cases where perpetrators had avoided conviction and what mistakes they'd made, how to manipulate child protective services if they ever came asking questions. He'd researched cryptocurrency to hide his payments, VPNs and encryption software for anonymous uploading. He'd left nothing to chance. Every step had been thought through, planned, practiced. This wasn't the work of someone who'd made a terrible mistake. This was someone who'd dedicated himself to this. The forums Noah participated in made Agent Mitchell's team physically ill. These were communities of predators who shared techniques, who encouraged each other, who normalized what they were doing. Noah's username on these sites was Patient Teacher. He'd given advice to other users, posted tips on how to groom family members, shared his own experiences with Betty. The FBI was now working to identify every member of these forums. There were 14 active users they'd flagged for investigation. This case was opening up a nationwide operation that nobody had known existed. Betty's abuse had exposed something much larger, something that had been happening in the shadows for years. Meanwhile, The twins were being questioned separately. Joseph and Jordan hadn't seen each other since their arrest. They were in different interrogation rooms, different holding cells. The detectives wanted to hear their stories without them being able to coordinate. Joseph was interviewed first. He was more defiant than his brother, angrier. When Detective Brown asked him to explain what had happened, Joseph crossed his arms. "Dad said it was normal. How are we supposed to know any different?" His voice had an edge to it, a defensiveness that made it clear he wasn't taking full responsibility. Detective Brown pressed him. "You're 21 years old. You know right from wrong." Joseph looked away. "He's my father. I trusted him." As the interview went on, Joseph slowly started to break. He described being 18 when Noah first brought him into it. He'd walked in on his father with Betty. Instead of stopping, Noah had said, "Come here. Let me teach you something." Joseph's voice cracked when he said it. "He told me all families have secrets. He said Mom wouldn't understand because women are emotional about these things. He said Betty was different and didn't experience things the same way we did." Detective Brown asked if Joseph had believed that. Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he admitted, "I knew it was wrong, but I was scared of him." That opened another door. Joseph revealed that Noah had threatened to hurt Elizabeth if the twins refused to participate. He said he'd make it look like an accident, like what happened to Betty. That confession led to another revelation. Joseph admitted that Betty's fall hadn't been an accident at all. "Dad told us to do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Betty had been trying to tell Mom something was wrong, drawing pictures, pointing at Dad, getting upset. Dad said she was becoming too difficult to manage. He told us exactly how to make it look like an accident. Joseph described how they'd positioned Betty's wheelchair at the top of the stairs, how they'd tipped it, how they'd watched her fall. "I wanted to call for help right away," Joseph said, "but Dad said to wait, to make sure it looked real." The detectives in the room had to take a break after that. Even with years of experience, hearing a young man describe deliberately paralyzing his sister was too much. Joseph also talked about the money. Noah had shown them how much he was making from the online content. He'd pull up his accounts and show us the numbers. He'd say, "See, other people think this is fine. This is normal. We're just meeting a demand." Noah had paid the twins too. Cash transfers that he'd framed as allowance for helping with Betty's care. $200 here, $500 there. Joseph admitted he'd used some of that money to buy new basketball shoes. The guilt in his voice when he said it was evident. "I should have known," he said. "I should have said something. I could have told a teacher or a coach or someone, but I didn't. I just took the money and did what he said." Jordan's interview was different. He broke down immediately. He couldn't stop crying. "I hate myself," he kept saying. "I hate what I am." Detective Wilkerson had to get him tissues and water before they could even start. When Jordan finally composed himself enough to talk, his story matched Joseph's but with more emotional depth. Jordan described how Noah had manipulated them. He'd show us videos of other people doing it and say it was normal. He'd find content online, not just his own stuff but other predators, and say, "Look, lots of families do this. It's just that society doesn't understand." Jordan said Noah had specifically targeted their insecurities. He'd tell us we were becoming men, that we'd have urges we wouldn't know how to handle, that Betty was safe because she couldn't get pregnant, at least that's what he said, and she couldn't tell anyone. Jordan talked about the comments from the online subscribers. Dad would show us the comments from people paying to watch. They'd say things like, "More content like this," or "She's perfect for this." And Dad would say, "We're providing a service. These people are going to watch this content anyway. Might as well be us making money from it." Jordan's voice broke when he described trying to stop. "I told Dad I didn't want to do it anymore. That was about a year ago. He beat us both. Not hard enough to leave marks that Mom would see, but hard enough that we knew he was serious." Jordan looked directly at Detective Wilkerson. He said if we told anyone, he'd say it was our idea, that we'd started it, and he'd just found out. He said we'd go to prison and he'd walk free. We believed him. Both statements lined up. The timeline matched. The details corroborated each other. But there was a clear difference between the twins. Joseph seemed more concerned about himself, about how this would affect his future, about whether he'd go to prison. Jordan seemed genuinely destroyed by what he'd done. He kept asking if Betty was okay, if there was any way to make things right. Detective Wilkerson had to tell him honestly, "I don't know if Betty will ever be okay. But telling the truth now is the first step." Jordan nodded and continued answering every question they asked. He didn't hide anything, didn't minimize anything. He laid it all out, even the parts that made him look worse. Betty's medical examination revealed even more horror. The doctors found multiple healed fractures that had never been reported or treated. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, signs of repeated trauma to her body that went back years. There was scarring consistent with long-term abuse. Betty had been losing weight too. Elizabeth had noticed but thought it was just picky eating. In reality, Betty had been refusing food as one of the few ways she could express distress. The medical team estimated the abuse had been happening 2 to 3 times per week minimum. That meant hundreds of incidents. Hundreds of times Betty had been hurt while Elizabeth was in the next room or out running errands. The pregnancy had complicated everything. Betty's body wasn't developed enough to carry a child. Her small frame, her disabilities, everything made this pregnancy extremely high risk. Dr. Renee Palmer, the child psychologist brought in to evaluate Betty, spent hours with her. Dr. Palmer specialized in working with disabled victims of abuse. She'd seen a lot in her career, but even she was shaken by Betty's condition. "This young woman has been in survival mode for years," she told Elizabeth during one of their meetings. "She shows signs of severe PTSD, dissociative behaviors. She's terrified of male voices. She has nightmares constantly. She screams in her sleep. Her development has actually regressed. Skills she had before the abuse started, she's lost." Dr. Palmer explained that Betty would need years of therapy, that she might never fully recover. "The trauma is deep," she said gently, "but people are resilient. With the right support, she can heal. It just won't be fast, and it won't be easy." The pregnancy had to be terminated. The ethics committee at the hospital made the decision after consulting with medical experts. Betty couldn't consent. Elizabeth had to make the choice for her. It was one of the hardest decisions of Elizabeth's life. She wasn't pro-choice by nature. Her faith had always led her toward protecting life. But this wasn't a normal situation. This was her 19-year-old daughter, who'd been raped by her own family members, whose body couldn't handle pregnancy, who didn't understand what was happening to her. Elizabeth signed the papers with tears streaming down her face. Rachel held her hand through the whole thing. "You're doing the right thing," Rachel kept saying. "You're protecting her." Elizabeth wanted to believe that. She had to believe that. The community reaction was immediate and divided. When news broke about what Noah had done, the neighborhood erupted. Some people were shocked. "They seemed like such a perfect family," neighbors told reporters who'd swarmed the street. "The boys were so helpful with their sister." Others were angry. "How did nobody see this?" one woman demanded on camera. "We were all right here. How did we miss it?" The church community fractured down the middle. Some people supported Elizabeth. "She did what any mother would want to do," they said. They organized fundraisers for her legal defense. They visited her at Rachel's house with meals and prayers. Others condemned her. "Violence is never the answer," they argued. "She should have let the justice system handle it." Some people even blamed Elizabeth for not knowing. "She was the mother," they whispered. "She should have seen the signs." The revelation that Noah had been profiting from Betty's abuse made everything worse. Babaree community was horrified to learn he'd been selling content online. He was making money off his own daughter, people said, disgust clear in their voices. It made the crime feel more intentional, more evil. If it had been impulse, maybe some people could have rationalized it. But this was business. This was planning. This was Noah systematically exploiting Betty for profit while pretending to be a devoted father and church deacon. Public opinion hardened against him fast. Even people who'd initially defended him changed their minds. "I thought I knew him," Pastor Vincent Reynolds said in a statement. "I was wrong, completely wrong." The media descended like vultures. National news picked up the story. Headlines screamed across television screens and newspapers. Perfect family's dark secret. Father profits from daughter's abuse online. Mother shoots husband after discovering years of exploitation. Cable news shows debated the case endlessly. Was Elizabeth a hero or a criminal? Should she have taken the law into her own hands? What did this case say about how society protects disabled adults? True crime podcasters showed up in the neighborhood, interviewing anyone who would talk. The family's privacy was completely destroyed. Photos of Elizabeth, Noah, the twins, and even Betty circulated online. People who'd never met them had opinions about them. The whole thing became a spectacle. The college the twins had attended launched its own investigation. Once their arrests became public, other students started coming forward. They told administrators that Joseph and Jordan had made inappropriate comments about disabled students, that they'd acted strangely sometimes, that there had been red flags people had dismissed. Teachers were interviewed. Coaches were questioned. Everyone was asking themselves how they'd missed it. The director of the special needs program, where the twins had volunteered, ended up resigning. She felt she'd failed to protect the very people she was supposed to help. "I should have seen something," she told investigators. "They were in my program. I should have known." The adoption agency that had approved Betty's placement came under scrutiny too. Social workers were interviewed about their process. How thoroughly had they vetted Noah? The background check had missed his sealed juvenile record. That record showed disturbing behavior from his teenage years. Behavior that, if known, might have disqualified him from adopting. The system had failed. That was becoming clear. Betty had fallen through cracks that shouldn't have existed. Now people were scrambling to figure out how to close those cracks so it didn't happen again. Noah's parents initially defended him. His mother refused to believe any of it. "My son wouldn't do this," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "That woman, Elizabeth, she's lying. She's always been jealous of him." But Noah's father was different. Once Detective Brown showed him some of the evidence. Not all of it, just enough. His face went white. "I don't know who that is," he said, pointing at his son's mugshot. "That's not the son I raised." He stopped posting bail money after that. Stopped taking Noah's calls from jail. His mother continued to visit, but even her resolve was weakening as more evidence became public. Elizabeth's family rallied completely. Rachel took in Betty full-time. Elizabeth's mother moved in temporarily to help. They organized fundraisers for legal fees and Betty's medical care. They spoke to reporters on Elizabeth's behalf when she couldn't. They made sure Betty had everything she needed. Elizabeth's mother told Detective Wilkerson something during one interview that stuck with her. "I always felt something was off about Noah," she said. "Not in a way I could name. Just a feeling. I ignored it because Elizabeth seemed happy. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." It seemed like everyone had regrets. Everyone had ignored some small sign, some tiny red flag, and collectively, those ignored signs had allowed Betty to suffer for 3 years. The charges against Noah were staggering. 47 counts of first-degree rape of a minor, 23 counts of production of child exploitation material, 38 counts of distribution, 15 counts of profiting from exploitation, conspiracy to commit child abuse, assault causing permanent disability. When you added it all up, Noah was facing 123 separate charges, maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The twins each faced multiple counts of rape. They were being charged as adults. The prosecution argued that the age and severity of the crimes warranted adult charges. Their maximum sentence was 25 years each. Elizabeth's charges were simpler, but still serious. Assault with a deadly weapon. The prosecutor had initially considered attempted murder, but that charge was dropped. There was too much evidence that Elizabeth had deliberately aimed for Noah's leg rather than anywhere vital. Still, she was facing up to 15 years in prison. Her bail hearing was set for January 5th. The courtroom was packed. People lined up outside hours before the hearing just to get a seat. Media filled the back rows. Elizabeth sat at the defense table with Maria Henderson beside her. She looked tired but composed. The prosecution argued that Elizabeth was dangerous. "She shot a man, Your Honor. Regardless of the circumstances, she took the law into her own hands. She's a threat to public safety." Maria stood up to respond. Her voice was firm, confident. "Your Honor, Elizabeth Ford is not a danger to anyone. She's a devoted mother who discovered the most horrific abuse imaginable. She shot her husband, not to kill him, but to stop him, to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. She's never been violent before. She has no criminal record. Her entire community knows her as someone who helps people. The only person she's ever hurt is the man who spent years raping her disabled daughter and profiting from it online." The courtroom was silent. Maria continued, "Mrs. Ford isn't going to run. She's not going to hurt anyone else. She just wants to take care of her daughter. We're asking the court to grant bail so she can do that." Character witnesses testified. Neighbors who'd known Elizabeth for years. Teachers who'd worked with her when she volunteered at the school. Church members who'd served alongside her. Everyone said the same thing. Elizabeth was kind, thoughtful. Someone who put others first. Someone who would never hurt anyone unless pushed beyond all limits. The judge listened to all of it. Then he made his decision. Bail is set at $50,000. Elizabeth closed her eyes in relief. Maria squeezed her hand. Within hours, the community had raised the money. An online fundraiser brought in donations from across the country. People who'd never met Elizabeth sent money because they believed in what she'd done. By that evening, Elizabeth was free. She went straight to Rachel's house to see Betty. Noah's legal strategy became clear quickly. He'd hired Gerald Mackenzie, one of the best defense attorneys money could buy. Mackenzie had a reputation for getting wealthy clients acquitted, even when the evidence against them seemed overwhelming. His strategy was simple: blame Elizabeth. In court filings, he argued that Elizabeth had been neglectful, that she'd ignored signs, that she'd failed to supervise her children properly. If Mrs. Ford had been paying attention, one filing read, none of this would have happened. My client trusted his wife to protect their daughter. She failed in that duty. The argument was outrageous, offensive, but it was also strategic. If Mackenzie could make Elizabeth look incompetent, it might create doubt about everything else. Mackenzie also argued that the evidence had been obtained illegally. Elizabeth had searched Noah's phone without permission. Everything she'd found should be thrown out. The prosecutor fought back hard. Mrs. Ford was Noah Ford's wife. She had access to his phone. She wasn't law enforcement. The Fourth Amendment doesn't apply here. The judge agreed. All evidence would be admissible. Mackenzie tried to get Noah a separate trial from the twins, arguing that having them all tried together would prejudice the jury. That motion was denied too. The judge ruled that all the crimes were too connected to separate. They'd all go to trial, but Noah's would come first. Against his lawyer's advice, Noah gave an interview to a local news station. He was calling from jail, his face appearing on screen via video feed. He looked thinner, tired, but his voice was strong. "I'm the real victim here," he said. "My wife shot me. She's turned my sons against me. She's making up these lies because she's angry I was successful. I've been a good father, a good husband, a good member of my community. These charges are false." When the reporter asked about the videos, Noah didn't flinch. "Those accounts were hacked. Someone stole my identity and used it to upload that content. I had nothing to do with it." The interview backfired spectacularly. People were outraged. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Claiming it was all fake made him look delusional. The prosecutor actually thanked Mackenzie for letting his client speak. "That interview is going to help us," he told his team. "The jury will see he has no remorse." The twins had their own legal battles. Each had a separate attorney. Joseph's lawyer argued that his client had been manipulated by his father, that he deserved rehabilitation rather than punishment. Jordan's lawyer made similar arguments but emphasized Jordan's remorse. Psychological evaluations were ordered for both. The results were telling. Joseph showed narcissistic traits, limited empathy. The psychologist noted that while Joseph had been groomed, he also seemed to have enjoyed the power dynamic. Jordan's evaluation was different. He showed signs of genuine trauma, dissociative disorder likely caused by the abuse he'd witnessed and participated in. The experts disagreed on whether either twin could be rehabilitated. Some thought yes, with intensive therapy. Others weren't sure. The prosecution offered both twins a deal. Testify against Noah and receive reduced sentences. Joseph jumped at it immediately. He wanted the lighter sentence, wanted a chance at a future. Jordan struggled more. Testifying meant admitting everything in open court, admitting what he'd done to Betty. But his lawyer convinced him it was the right thing to do. Both twins eventually agreed. Elizabeth's defense was straightforward. Maria planned to argue extreme emotional disturbance, that Elizabeth had experienced an acute psychological break when she discovered the abuse, that she'd been acting to protect Betty from further harm. Expert witnesses were lined up. A psychologist prepared to testify about trauma responses. A medical expert ready to discuss Betty's injuries and what they meant. Over 30 people volunteered to be character witnesses for Elizabeth. The judge had to limit how many could actually testify. Betty's status was precarious. The pregnancy had been terminated successfully. Her physical health was improving slowly. But the psychological damage was severe. She'd need years of therapy, maybe decades. She was living with Rachel now. Elizabeth visited every day, but always with supervision. The court wanted to make sure Betty felt safe. Dr. Palmer reported that Betty did seem happy to see Elizabeth, that she responded positively to her mother, but she was still terrified of men, still having nightmares, still regressing in some of her skills. Pretrial motions dragged on for weeks. Noah's team tried everything. They claimed he was insane. The judge rejected it after psychiatric evaluation. They tried to get evidence suppressed. Denied. They requested a change of venue, arguing the publicity made a fair trial impossible. Denied again. By mid-January, it was clear the trials were going forward. Noah's was scheduled for March. The twins would go in April, Elizabeth in May. The media coverage was relentless. A movement calling itself Free Elizabeth gained momentum online. Petitions circulated. Protests were organized outside the courthouse. But there was also a counter-movement. No one is above the law, they chanted. They argued that Elizabeth's actions, however understandable, couldn't be excused. That vigilante justice was dangerous. The debate raged across social media, cable news, and dinner tables across America. On January 15th, preliminary hearings were held for all three cases. Noah's hearing was first. The evidence presented was enough to make people in the gallery gasp. Financial records showing his earnings. Testimony from FBI agents about what they'd found. Medical experts describing Betty's injuries. Noah sat through all of it with no expression on his face. That detachment disturbed people more than anything. The twins' hearing was emotional. Both young men cried. Jordan apologized repeatedly. "I'm so sorry," he said to the judge. "I'm so sorry to Betty. I don't deserve forgiveness." Joseph apologized too, but his seemed more rehearsed, more focused on getting sympathy. Elizabeth's hearing was brief, just a formality. She remained out on bail. As they all left the courthouse that day, they knew the real battles were still ahead. The trials would determine everything. March arrived cold and gray. Noah's trial began on the first Monday of the month. District Attorney James Whitmore led the prosecution himself. This was the biggest case of his career, and he wasn't delegating it. The jury selection took 3 days. They needed people who could handle the graphic evidence without falling apart. The final jury was 7 women and 5 men, ages ranging from 26 to 63. They all swore they could be impartial. The trial was expected to last 4 weeks. Week 1 was all prosecution. Whitmore built his case methodically. Forensic experts testified about the digital evidence. The FBI agent described Noah's online business. A financial expert showed the jury exactly how much money Noah had made. $180,000 over 3 years. The jury's faces showed disgust. The videos were the hardest part. The judge allowed edited portions to be shown. Mostly audio with limited visual. Even that was almost too much. 2 jury members cried. 3 requested breaks. The gallery cleared out as people couldn't handle what they were hearing. Noah sat at the defense table expressionless. That lack of emotion was noted by everyone. When court recessed for the day, reporters asked jury consultants what they thought. "His demeanor is hurting him," one expert said. "The jury expects to see remorse, shame, something. He's giving them nothing." Week 2 brought the twins to testify. Jordan went first. He walked to the stand looking small and broken. He described everything, how Noah had groomed them, how he'd shown them videos to normalize it, how he'd told them Betty wouldn't understand, how he'd threatened them if they tried to stop. "He showed us the comments from people online," Jordan said, his voice shaking. "Comments from people paying to watch, and he said we were meeting demand, that we were providing a service." The prosecutor asked if Jordan knew it was wrong. Jordan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, I knew. I was scared, but I knew." Noah's attorney cross-examined him hard. He tried to make Jordan seem like he was lying to get a lighter sentence, but Jordan didn't break. He just kept answering honestly, even when the answers made him look bad. Joseph's testimony was less effective. He was more defensive, more focused on explaining why he'd done what he did rather than taking responsibility. The jury seemed less sympathetic to him. You could see it in their faces. Elizabeth testified in week 3. Maria had advised against it, but Elizabeth insisted. "I need to tell Betty's story," she'd said. When she took the stand, the courtroom was silent. Whitmore asked her to describe discovering the abuse. Elizabeth did. Her voice was steady at first. She described finding Betty bleeding, the hospital, the DNA results, finding Noah's phone, every detail laid out clearly. Then Whitmore asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Mrs. Ford, do you regret shooting your husband?" Elizabeth looked directly at the jury. "I regret not protecting Betty sooner. The shooting? No, I don't regret that." Noah's attorney jumped on that during cross-examination. "You tried to kill him," he shouted. Elizabeth didn't flinch. "If I wanted him dead, he'd be dead. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to understand pain. And I wanted to make sure he couldn't walk out of this courtroom and hurt another person. Or profit from another person." The prosecution rested after 3 weeks. Noah's defense lasted barely 4 days. Mackenzie tried to paint Noah as a victim of circumstance. He brought character witnesses who testified that Noah had always seemed like a good man. But after the prosecution's case, nobody was buying it. The defense's biggest mistake was putting Noah on the stand. Mackenzie had advised against it, but Noah insisted. He wanted to defend himself. It was a disaster. Under questioning, Noah denied everything. He claimed the accounts were hacked, the videos were deepfakes, the financial records were fabricated. When asked about Elizabeth shooting him, he played the victim. "My wife has always been unstable," he said. "I think she finally snapped." The jury wasn't buying any of it. You could see it in their faces. The disgust, the anger. The verdict came back after only 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all 123 counts. It took over an hour just to read all the verdicts. Noah stood there, his face finally showing something. Fear. Real fear. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge didn't hold back. "Mr. Ford, you are a predator of the worst kind," he said. "You weaponized your position as a father, as a husband, as a trusted community member, to systematically destroy a vulnerable person. You didn't just abuse her. You sold her. You made money from her suffering. You corrupted your own sons, turning them into versions of yourself. You deserve no mercy because you showed none. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Noah tried to appeal immediately. "I'll fight this. he said as they led him away. The judge looked at him coldly. You can try, but you'll die in prison. The twins' trial in April was shorter. The prosecution acknowledged they'd been groomed but argued they'd still known right from wrong. They were 21, adults, old enough to understand. The defense presented their psychological evaluations, showed how Noah had manipulated them. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. They found both guilty, but with different recommendations. Jordan was recommended for rehabilitation, Joseph for standard adult sentencing. When sentencing came, Jordan received 12 years with parole eligibility after 8. Joseph got 20 years with eligibility after 15. The courtroom was divided on whether that was fair. Some thought it was too light. Others thought it appropriate given how young they were when it started. Elizabeth's trial in May was the most publicized. The prosecution had to move forward. They couldn't set a precedent that vigilante justice was acceptable, but they offered her a deal. Plead guilty, no jail time, just probation. Elizabeth refused. I want a trial, she told Maria. I want people to hear why I did it. The trial lasted a week. The prosecution's case was simple. She shot someone. That's illegal. End of story. The defense painted a picture of a woman pushed beyond all human limits. Expert witnesses testified about psychological breaks, about moral injury, about what happens when a mother discovers her child has been tortured for years. Over 30 character witnesses spoke for Elizabeth. Every single one said the same thing. She was not a violent person. She was a protector. When Elizabeth testified, she was calm, almost serene. I did what needed to be done, she told the jury. Noah had money. He had lawyers. He had community support. I watched him almost walk free once. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't risk him doing this to someone else. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They came back with a guilty verdict on assault. But the foreman added something. With extreme sympathy and recommendation for maximum leniency. The judge agreed. He sentenced Elizabeth to 3 years suspended, 5 years probation, community service, counseling, no jail time. Elizabeth stood as he read the sentence. Thank you, Your Honor, she said quietly, then added, I'd do it again. 6 months passed. By September, life had settled into a new rhythm. Betty was making slow progress. She lived with Rachel permanently now. Weekly therapy with Dr. Palmer. She was communicating more through her tablet. Still afraid of men, but learning to trust women again. Elizabeth visited every day. Betty would light up when she saw her mother. That was progress. Small, but real. Elizabeth had lost the house. Too many memories. Too expensive to maintain. She moved into a small apartment near Rachel's place. She worked remotely now as a victim advocate for disabled abuse survivors. She spoke at conferences, schools, anywhere they'd listen. She'd founded an organization called Betty's Voice that advocated for disabled adults. Noah was in maximum security prison, protective custody because other prisoners didn't tolerate child abusers. He continued to claim innocence. Every appeal was denied. He'd spend the rest of his life there. Jordan was in a rehabilitation facility. He was doing well in therapy, writing letters to Betty that Dr. Palmer reviewed to see if Betty was ready to read them. He had a parole hearing in 6 years. Joseph was in adult prison. Minimal progress in therapy. More focused on himself than on what he'd done. Other inmates knew what he was in for. He was isolated most of the time. Early parole was unlikely. Elizabeth gave an interview exactly 1 year after that terrible caroling night. The reporter asked if she regretted shooting Noah. Elizabeth's answer was immediate. I don't. I regret that I had to. I regret that the system moved so slowly that a mother felt she had no choice. But I'd do it again. Every time. She talked about Betty. She's alive. She's healing. That's all that matters. She knows she's loved. She knows she's safe. The reporter asked about Noah. He'll die in prison. That's justice. But Betty will carry what he did forever. That's the real tragedy. He didn't just abuse her. He sold her. He made money from her suffering. That's not just a crime. That's complete dehumanization. The interview ended with Elizabeth's message to other parents. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't dismiss fear or discomfort. Disabled adults can't always tell you they're being hurt. You have to watch, listen, notice. I failed at that. Don't make my mistake. The final scene showed Elizabeth visiting Betty. They sat together on Rachel's couch. Betty's head rested on Elizabeth's shoulder. Elizabeth was reading to her. Betty's favorite book. Halfway through, Betty smiled. A real, genuine smile. The first in months. Elizabeth saw it and tears filled her eyes. "That's my girl," she whispered. "That's my brave, beautiful girl." This case exposed something too many people want to ignore. Disabled people, especially disabled adults, are among the most vulnerable to abuse. And often, that abuse comes from within their own families. Sometimes abusers profit from that exploitation, sell their victims online to people who specifically seek out disabled, nonverbal individuals because they know those people can't report them. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, or if you suspect someone is being harmed, reach out. Your voice could save a life. The Betty's story is a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a trusted family member. Sometimes it hides behind church pews and school volunteering and neighborhood Christmas lights. Sometimes it's motivated not just by power and control, but by profit. But Betty's story is also a testament to resilience, to the strength of a mother's love, to the importance of believing victims even when they can't speak for themselves. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the reality of hidden abuse, share it. Talk about it. Don't let the conversation end here. Support organizations that advocate for disabled victims. Donate, volunteer, educate yourself. The best way to honor Betty's survival is to make sure no other person endures what she did. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories that matter, the ones that make you uncomfortable, the ones that challenge your assumptions, the ones that demand justice. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. What shocked you most about Betty's story? How do we better protect vulnerable people in our communities? We read every comment, and your insights matter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of a community that refuses to look away.